and good morning to those of us who are on the West Coast. You are joining for our National Science Foundation's Technology, Innovation, and Partnerships Directorate's Tech Labs Request for Information Q&A section. We are going to start off with some opening remarks with our Assistant Director for TIP, Dr. Erwin Gianchandani. So Erwin, I will turn it over to you to get us started.
Erwin, I think we're having some trouble hearing you. Otherwise, it might just be me, but.
Can you hear me now?
We can.
Okay, great. Sorry about that, folks. Good afternoon, good morning, depending on where you might be located. As Bridget mentioned, I'm Erwin Gianchandani, and I have the pleasure of serving as the Assistant Director for Technology, Innovation, and Partnerships, so helping to lead the TIP Directorate here at NSF. And it's my pleasure to welcome you to this webinar today, and really just welcome you and kind of get out of the way, because we really want this to be an opportunity for you all to be able to ask our program team questions, as some of you are already doing in the Q&A interface here, about the Tech Labs initiative, the RFI that's out there, and what it is that we're trying to accomplish with this as we move forward. I want to maybe just say a couple of framing principles, if you will, at the outset. And then, as I said, I'm going to turn it back over to Bridget to take things from there. So first of all, we're really excited about this concept, this initiative that we have rolled out in the form of an RFI initially. And we're really excited to see the excitement from you all, the interest, the engagement from you all in the community around this topic. So let me first say thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules to be a part of this webinar. And I know many of you are working furiously on responses to the RFI, which are due next week. We really, really appreciate that, because I think the second thing that I want to stress here is the fact that what we have put out in the form of the RFI really is sort of an initial vision, an initial straw person, if you will, for this Tech Labs initiative. The way that I described it on the webinar back in December is you should think of this as sort of laying out in pencil form the concept for the Tech Labs, and what we would love to be able to get from you all is input that can help us inform sort of the thinking behind this further, so that we can then take that pencil and turn it into ink in the form of an RFP that we might put out at some point down the road. So let me just say, from all of us at NSF, thank you for the time and interest and engagement and excitement around this concept. Even those of you who may be skeptical about it, the fact that you're engaging, we really appreciate that. And we're looking forward to your questions today. And we're also looking forward to you helping us sort of move from the design phase, which is where we are right now, to potentially down the road a competition phase for the Tech Labs initiative. And so with that, I also want to acknowledge everybody who is on the NSF side of this conversation today. It is these folks who make this possible. So specifically the program team, Bridget, Becca, Joda, also Patrick Green from our contracting office. So my thanks to everyone there, plus the entire MEM team and all of our other support staff who are making this possible. Thanks to them for hosting this webinar Q&A session today, and for all of the thought leadership and efforts that have gone into formulating this RFI in the first place. So with that, I'm going to hand it back over to Bridget, and look forward to your questions, look forward to the dialogue, and look forward especially to your inputs as well by the deadline next week. Back to you, Bridget.
Thanks so much, Erwin. As Erwin mentioned, my name is Bridget Taraga. I am the Strategic Advisor for Partnerships in the TIP Directorate at NSF. Can everyone see my slides, and are they in the proper mode? Okay, excellent. Thanks so much. So this webinar is mainly going to be a Q&A session, and I'm going to explain in a minute how we're going to structure that Q&A section. So just wait one moment before you drop all of your urgent questions in the Q&A. I'd also just like to highlight that we did have a webinar in December where we went through a full presentation of Tech Labs. And there is a link to that webinar here on the slides. And in a minute, I will also drop that link in the chat. You can read the RFI by going to the QR code, the great part about the link to the webinar is that it also includes the full slide deck. So today we're not going to go through the full Tech Labs presentation. We're really going to focus on the questions that we have been getting from you, questions that have been coming into Tech Labs at nsf.gov over the last month. We've been getting a number of questions. We have organized them into different categories, and then we want to make time to take new questions today. And as Erwin mentioned, we are really in the design stage of this program. So while we're answering your questions today, really this stage is actually about you answering our questions. And it's our questions about how we should design this program, what we should be thinking about in terms of team eligibility, about the structure of intellectual property, about topic areas. And so we're seeking your constructive feedback. The RFI is open until January 20th, and we welcome your responses to techlabs@nsf.gov. Your insights are really critical as we are going to be using them to refine the program before we do launch it. A key part here is I want to mention that this is really a market intelligence gathering stage. This is not about submitting pre-proposals. An RFI response is not required to submit a Tech Labs proposal in the future. This is really about program design. So you don't need to pitch your idea for a Tech Lab to us. You're not going to get any feedback on what you submit through the RFI process. We're not using it as a down select. It is really just about making sure that we design the program in the best way that we can. So getting into the questions section, we've been getting many, many questions. Thank you so much for the questions that have been coming in, as well as the RFI responses that have come in to date. We've tried to organize the questions into a number of categories, and because we have hundreds of people on this webinar, we're going to organize at least the first part of this webinar so that we address questions in these categories together. And so if you do have questions, please take note of these categories of frequently asked questions. And if someone who's not sharing the slides but is on the Tech Labs team can drop these categories of questions in the chat in the next few minutes, that would be helpful as well. If you have questions about eligibility and team composition, please put a Roman numeral 1 before your question in the chat to help us be organized. If you have questions on program structure and phasing, please put a Roman numeral 2 in the Q&A when you ask your questions. Similarly, use number 3 if you have questions about the scope or the technology topics. If you have questions about the other transaction mechanism that we will be using to support Tech Lab teams, please put those as number 4. If you want to talk about the timeline for the program announcement or the evaluation process that we're using, put those as Roman numeral number 5. And I'm sure there are many other categories of questions that you have. And so those can go as Roman numeral number 6. To the best of our ability, we're going to use that so that we can be sorting the questions and then answering them live. Okay, and so for our first set of questions, we've had a number of questions about eligibility as well as team composition. Folks have been asking us who is eligible to apply and who is eligible to participate in some way, shape, or form. And so this is quite a long list of the types of entities folks have been asking us about if they're eligible. We've also been getting questions about what does team members mean? Are team members individuals or entities? When we say there are 10 to 50 members, are those 10 to 50 people, 10 to 50 entities? As well as how does NSF define an independent research organization? So I'm going to turn it over to my colleague now. And I can't remember if it was Joe or Rebecca.
I think it's me.
Okay, wonderful.
Thanks so much, Bridget. And so I'm going to try and tackle several of these all at once, but yeah, I want to emphasize again a couple of things that Bridget said, just to put everybody's mind at ease. We are not using this RFI process to do a down select. There's no preference for folks who submit their ideas at this RFI stage in order to advance to future stages. There's no extra points that might come in a future solicitation. We are absolutely still in the program design phase at this RFI period, and we are not in a competition phase at this point. We're still designing what that competition might look like. So just with that out of the way, I think there's a number of questions that have come in about who would be eligible to apply. And I want to emphasize one thing, which is that this is different from NSF's prior work around center scale or consortia-driven programs. This is really designed around an individual team housed within a single entity. And that's our current thinking. Now, if you've strong opinionated perspectives about this, we definitely encourage you to submit a response to the RFI outlining those opinions and helping us shape this or maybe avoid some critical error. But we are currently thinking of this tool as something designed for a single team pursuing a concentrated, focused technical problem bottleneck set of that is tied to a set of technical milestones. But this is not a effort where we would expect in a future solicitation to invite many organizations or many institutions to team up together and submit a joint proposal. We have had those kinds of programs in the past, but that's not the way we're currently thinking about this. Now, I've got a number of questions here I'm going to try and take one at a time, but I want to recognize that many of these, we actually don't have the answers yet. And that's exactly what this RFI process is about. And I will probably say that several more times through this webinar. I apologize for how repetitive this is, but we really, really do mean it whenever we say we don't have all the answers at this point. Okay, do we anticipate any support service partners to assist labs? It's a great question. I think we are absolutely examining the possibility of that, whether it be some sort of technical assistance like organization or something similar to the Builder platform, which supported the NSF engines. We are open to that, but we have not made a decision on that. We could imagine something like shared back office support. So you imagine like these teams are coming online, but they don't want to necessarily start all the HR or finance work from scratch. I could imagine that being something that could be very useful. If you think it would be very useful and you're thinking about submitting to a future solicitation or RFP, or you have an opinion but you aren't interested, regardless, I would definitely encourage you to submit an RFI response with what kinds of services would be most valuable. How can foreign entities be involved? It's a great question. I think that we do have some, we anticipate that there would be some pretty straightforward guidance in an actual solicitation on this. Bridget, I think you may have been one to answer this in the past, but I would expect these entities to be US based. There will be research security guidelines that are in line with many of our other research grants that you can find on nsf.gov, and maybe we can put those in the chat. But we do not anticipate that a purely foreign entity would be able to be a eligible entity for this time around. Bridget, I want to stop there and see if you have anything to add to that.
Sure. I would just add the comment that there's no citizenship requirement. So there is a requirement that they be US-based entities, but you could have folks who are here legally on visas who are international, who are participating in the tech labs.
Thank you. Can tech labs receive funding from other sources, including international? I think we'll have more guidance on international funding sources, but just broadly on receiving funding from other sources, it is our anticipation at this point that tech labs absolutely could receive funding from other entities, and we might even encourage it or assess it. I don't want to say that we would require it or weight it at this point. I think those are still open decisions, but I think it's certainly something that we see positively at this given moment. Are dual appointments allowed? I think this gets into a lot of the questions around exactly what do we mean by independent entity, and where do we draw the line, and how far removed does it need to be from maybe a parent institution, or spinouts allowed? Those are all things we are seeking your input on in this RFI process, because those are big questions that are going to determine a lot about, and I know that many of you on this call are anxious about that right now. We are absolutely wanting your input on what level of independent or operational autonomy would be most useful, and what maybe challenges we're currently overlooking. I think that right now our thinking is that we want to see a level of independent and operational autonomy and independence that allows teams to make decisions about hiring, about where the best use of the marginal utility of their dollar goes, without having to worry about things like indirect costs or burdensome procurement policies, or even thinking about bureaucratic layers of hiring policies, so that teams could really go seek the talent and equipment they need to accomplish their goals. We are open to what various models could look like in that within that broad definition, and I expect we would get substantially more specific in a future solicitation. But at this point, I think we're seeking input on that specifically. So please let us know about if you have an opinionated perspective on this. We want to hear it. I will say we have also heard from universities and other kinds of institutions that are thinking about the Tech Labs program in not just from an eligibility perspective, but also through ways they could enable their faculty or talent within their ecosystems to pursue pathways like this. Those are some of the most exciting questions and ideas that we've heard. We would love for those institutions to apply and tell us what their perspectives are, and then maybe what some of their ideas are for being able to fully lean into an opportunity like this. Once again, do I need to submit, this is the next question, do I need to submit an RFI response to be eligible to apply? No, you do not. We are not going to be requiring a RFI response. In fact, we expect that many people or many teams that may be interested in this program will not have responded to the RFI. But we do think that if you have a perspective or on the kinds of topics, team composition, any of the topics that we're talking about today, and you want us to know about it, please do submit an RFI response, not necessarily to advantage yourself in a future competition, but to help shape the program design, because your opinions really do count here. And I think that we aren't going to know what those opinions are unless we have an opportunity to assess them. Similarly, can you apply to the Tech Labs program prior to having an established team? It is our current thinking that a phase 0 would not require an established team to exist. And this is really both a planning phase and a funded due diligence phase. It's a little bit of both, where we will work with the team to set technical milestones, and also to really tackle additional due diligence that allows us to go further into the technical questions that that team might be willing to jump into. Becca, I don't know if you wanted to add anything else. I know you've been thinking a lot about the phase 0, but I recognize that you might have some more thoughts on that question.
Yeah, I would agree with what you were saying, with the caveat that we will not be sending phase 0 money to individuals without any kind of lead organizational structure. We anticipate that the phase 0 teams might be affiliated still with a different institution than in their phase 1, or with their kind of final tech lab institution or entity. There's going to be a good amount of flexibility in that ramp up phase. But again, if you have like a team of loose scientists, unaffiliated scientists, you would have to form an entity for us to be able to give you money.
Great. Will NSF facilitate connection across sectors beyond the operationally autonomous tech lab? We often are connecting our grantees to other parts of our portfolio at TIP and NSF more broadly. I imagine that if there was a tech lab that came out of an NSF engine, for example, we would want to make the connections between those entities. So we're always thinking about those kinds of things. Is there a requirement for physical co-location of teams? We have not determined that. I think that within a single entity we're pretty certain that that's something that we would like to see. But whether or not they're all physically in the same geographic location, I think is I would imagine that would be determined by the team's vision and approach, and there may be reasons that a team might be split in different places. But if you have thoughts on that, we would encourage folks to submit RFI responses. I'm gonna take another 2 questions and then move on to the next section and see if we can start answering questions from other categories. Does the team need to be a for-profit or a nonprofit? We have not made a decision on that. However, I will say that it is currently our strong impression that the teams would likely be offer some sort of clear public benefit, and I think that is a weight toward a nonprofit eligibility requirement. We again would love input on that and what we may be missing, and we're also examining maybe different kinds of tax structures that could encompass sort of a broad range of things beyond maybe just a pure 501c3. But I think that we certainly would want to make sure that there is a pretty obvious public benefit for the research work that's happening here. And I think that's one of the big questions on the eligibility side. So I think there are many questions. Many startups have sort of proposed or are submitting ideas via our RFI process about for-profits. I think our current thinking right now is that we would want to make sure that this technology had a very clear path to being a public benefit. So I'll stop there and turn it over to, I'm not sure who's next for the, is that you, Becca?
Yeah, I think we discussed that I would take on some of this one.
Yeah.
So for the program structure and phasing, some of the common questions we got were, what would phase 0 look like? How much of the team is needed at the start? For that kind of question, we are really looking at not just flexibility within teams and autonomy within teams, but also the potential for funding a wide variety of different types of tech lab teams, especially for that phase 0. So the phase 0 would be pretty short. We see this as like a ramp up phase where you would be scaling and scoping out your tech lab. One of the major things that teams would be doing during this phase 0 is developing their quantitative milestones for phase 1. And those specific milestones and any deliverables or kind of outcomes that come out of those milestones are something that we anticipate will kind of make or break a tech lab. And so we want teams to really deeply think about those during that 9-month planning phase, in addition to doing any additional technical work or scaling recruitment. How much of the team is needed at the start? This is a great question because you're looking not just at people, but at kind of full-time equivalents, FTEs. We anticipate that the team members at the beginning of phase 0 would not yet be full-time. They might still be associated with another institution. They might be planning if they were accepted to that phase 1 to take either a leave of absence or a sabbatical or some other type of award or funding mechanism provided by their institution to be able to pursue the Tech Lab initiative for a number of years. So how much is needed at the start is not necessarily in the planning phase going to be full-time. And we anticipate that the team in the planning phase would be a core leadership or key personnel team. And then they would continue to scale up and ramp up and hire throughout the course of phase 0 and into phase 1. What are the funding levels? This is a really good question. We would anticipate that it would be less than the phase 1 funding levels. So the range we have, I believe, is 10 to 50 million per year. You can imagine a phase 1 would be less than 10 million. Okay, what happens to the tech lab after the 7-year period or into the phase 2? Does it dissolve? Does it become a startup? Does it persist as a new entity? I would hope that successful tech labs would not immediately dissolve, that they would continue to be impacting the research landscape in that area. You can imagine that a tech lab that was really focused on scaling a product or scaling a platform technology into higher level TRLs would really focus on, would maybe be ready to scale into a startup or be ready for additional industry investment. You can imagine that a team that's really focused on fulfilling a specific societal need might go back to the cutting edge and re-look at where that cutting edge is and find new problems within their mission area. You can also imagine that there would be other NSF programs that might be applicable for a graduating tech lab team. They might be within TIP, they might not be, but these are areas that I think are really interesting for successful tech lab teams. Will there be more phase zeros than phase ones? Yes, we do anticipate some amount of down select between the phase 0 and phase 1. We kind of anticipate about 2 to 4 awards going to per topic going to tech lab teams for phase 0, and 1 to 3, 1 to 2 awards for a fully fledged tech lab. You can imagine that these are pretty significant investments in the teams. So we're really betting on strong teams that we see a lot of future for in the phase 1. Okay, I'm looking for
Becca,
number
we've
2.
also gotten questions on how will tech labs be managed?
So we anticipate that we'll need to do our due diligence for these tech labs as they graduate from phase 0 to phase 1 and phase 1 to phase 2. This is something that is still being worked on, but you might imagine site visits, you might imagine working closely with the NSF PDs that are experts, subject matter experts in the area, and generally showing strong real world progress in the area in order to manage the tech labs and to make decisions into phase 2.
And Becca, one more question in the program structure and phasing is, have you thought about having a parallel track for smaller awards? There are some interesting and impactful topics that could be material advanced with $1 million a year, but are not ready to scale to 10 to 50 million per year.
That is interesting. I think we are envisioning that tech labs will look quite different from each other. And it would be interesting to see tech labs that are at that smaller, really focused funding level. And I could imagine a tech lab that had $1 to $2 million per year, really being able to focus in on a key problem. If that is one of these teams here, I would definitely recommend answering the RFI, focusing on that, how much budget do you need question. I think that's in section 4, and letting us know that you actually need less than what we're saying in order to really execute upon the mission. I think that's good information for us.
And we have such a wide range of programs across NSF and across TIP in particular that also have smaller budgets that might be applicable for those teams as well. Is there anyone else on the Tech Lab team that sees a pressing question for the program structure and phasing section, or shall we move on to section 3, scope and technology topics?
We can go ahead and move on.
Okay, so for the topics, we've included in the RFI kind of a list of potential topics or topics that are really illustrative of what we mean when we say a tech lab topic. You'll notice that they're quite umbrella topics, things like AI or biotechnology. And then it's up to the individual teams to propose a clear mission within each of those topics. They will be determined by NSF program directors and by NSF leadership, as well as kind of in collaboration with the wider government topics that are really important across the US government and US competitiveness. So you'll notice that the topics that we've defined in the RFI are ones that are really important to NSF and to US competitiveness. Is the program for technology versus basic science? TIP itself as a directorate is really focused on translational technology and moving forward beyond basic science to real world outcomes. And so that is what our focus is on. I think this model is a very flexible one and one that could be more involved on the basic science side in the future. But for this solicitation, we'll really be focusing on that translational science and the applied science that comes out of basic research. What are the starting and ending TRL expectations? We have somewhat purposefully not included specific TRL numbers in this, but I will say that we are looking for the beginning TRL levels to be industry investment, something that's too risky for industry to solidly invest in and put a lot of money towards because it might not pan out. And we're looking for the final TRL expectations to be not completely all the way to market adoption, but around the area where it is now de-risked for industry investment. Does the scope include medical research? We have a NIH that invests in medical research quite a bit. So I would imagine that it would be difficult for NSF to choose a topic that's specifically medical research outside of what NSF already invests in, which is kind of the medical technology side of things. That being said, Joda, did you want to say something?
Oh, yeah. I was just going to say one of the helpful lines that we typically draw on this, or at least we did during the NSF engines, and it's been useful for me to think about this, which is that if it involves a clinical trial, typically falls on the NIH side of the line. But if it's an enabling technology that might allow therapeutics to be scaled up or produced, like a bioreactor, those kinds of things, we've certainly invested in like certain kinds of cell-free systems. I think that those are fair game. I think the hard line tends to be if this is going to involve a human clinical trial at some point. I think that is unlikely to be a good fit for NSF.
But if there is a specific area that you think NSF could and should invest in as a tech lab, we do recommend that you answer the RFI and let us know what that is. Can you give me feedback on my topic area or RFI response? No, we will not be doing that. This is not a call for proposals, and we are simply going to use your responses to draft the final solicitation. So thank you for those responses. Is NSF open to suggested topics? How can a particular technology be proposed? By answering the RFI, yes, we're very open to suggested topics. We're open to kind of the more specific areas of where you want your tech lab to focus on, as well as the larger topics. Again, we will not be providing feedback, but we are closely following what people submit. Will NSF be maintaining some balance in funding across various topics? Yes, the topics that we announce, we anticipate funding 1 to up to 3 phase 1 tech labs per topic. So that will be balanced across the different topics and across the different missions. We are looking for a balanced portfolio here. Do you envision topics will be broad, such as biotechnology, or focused, such as curing cancer? So again, probably not curing cancer. But the examples we gave were quite broad. You can imagine that going forward, some of them might be broad, some of them might be a little bit more specific. I wouldn't want it to be too specific such that it looks like um, a NSF program level kind of question, or something that's a bit too focused, where we are proposing the mission instead of the broader topic. I think it's really important that the missions come from the teams. Is there any thought to focus on hardware versus software, with software resulting in more complicated licensing considerations? I imagine that teams will find both hardware and software missions within these different tech lab topics. They're both extremely important to applied technologies and applied science. And the more complicating licensing considerations are something that will have to be worked out. You know, we do want tech labs to be quite autonomous. We want the tech labs to be proposing their own IP plan. We still have to figure out exactly how we want the IP to work in such a way that it doesn't kind of bottleneck the technology and prevent the technology from moving forward to societal and economic impact. But yeah, the complicated licensing considerations will be part of the Tech Labs program and part of the autonomy of each Tech Lab team. Is there any advantage for teams to have concepts aligned with KTAs that appear in other NSF solicitations? Not specifically. You will not get extra points for aligning with existing NSF solicitations. But the topics that NSF releases will, by their very nature, be aligned with our key technology areas that TIP focuses on. That doesn't mean that they'll be directly the key technology areas, but they will be aligned. Bridget, Joda, do you see any other pressing Scope 3 questions?
There's one other question that's related to, why do we mention philanthropic support or nonprofit alignment in the Tech Labs RFI? And I just like to say that we are, we recognize that Tech Labs are not going to exist in a vacuum. And so we're really interested in hearing folks' suggestions as part of the RFI process on how existing structures that might be supported by philanthropy or that might be supported by industry or academia, how they all might work together to really have the maximum benefit. And so that kind of those different partnerships models, we're interested in hearing your suggestions on as part of this process. Any other questions before we move on to the
I just have one more question that I really liked here. What is the risk appetite of the Tech Labs programs? I would say compared to maybe some other programs at NSF, we're excited to fund risky tech labs. We're excited for these tech labs to have bold new ideas and to be risky. We anticipate that a otherwise successful tech lab might not or rather, a tech lab might still be a good investment to us, even if it is not successful in its goals, because we are looking to fund risky tech labs and risky new ideas.
Yeah, and I just want to add to that really quickly. And I think that a big part of the risk is going to be in technology risk, right? Which is that the teams might be willing to, or should be open and driving toward bets that might not pan out on a particular technology solution and I think we would be excited about them if the sort of risk reward were balanced in such a way that even though it might be highly risky, the opportunity to build a wide variety of technologies on top of that risk, if it were successful, is there. I think the counterbalance to that is that a risky technology proposal or vision should be counterbalanced by a team that gives us confidence that risk is well placed, that this team has the sort of track record and talent necessary to really tackle that risk. And so I think whenever we're evaluating when we're eventually evaluating these teams, once we get to the competition stage, I think we're going to spend a lot of time evaluating the track record and capacity of the individuals involved in the project and their connection to the topic area and their success in their work prior, rather than necessarily the sort of how neatly the sort of project proposals or technical milestones proposed fit within our expectation set. I think that's important, but I think that this is, again, much more focused on team capacity and their ability to sort of take on those risky propositions.
Very quickly before we move on, is the program concerned with other societal impacts beyond tech translation? Yes, tech translation is one of several outcomes that we recommend. Societal and economic impacts are another.
And now we'd like to invite Patrick Breen to join us and take a couple of questions on the other transaction.
Right, thank you. So other transactions is a relatively new authority to the National Science Foundation. We did receive this authority just only in 2022 through the CHIPS and Science Act. The reason we're looking towards this type of agreement, and I'm going to start with the advantages, and then we're going to back into where you can find all this lovely information. The advantages really are in terms of what it is not. Right, so another transaction is not a FAR-based procurement contract. It is not a federal financial assistance agreement, right? So it's not a grant or a cooperative agreement. Most of the entities who currently do business with the National Science Foundation are much more familiar with our financial assistance side of the house. So if you're used to looking at those resources, none of that applies here. The uniform guidance does not apply, or proposal guidance does not apply. Very different mechanism. The advantages really do come down to that we can enter into very flexible, goal-oriented, and negotiable relationships. The bulk of the time we spend with the potential awardee on another transaction is actually negotiating the terms and conditions for the award. It does allow us through that negotiation process to include, amend, or exclude clauses and requirements that we don't believe would be beneficial to this particular agreement. So there are things that broadly apply. We'll have to apply those. But in terms of discretionary clauses or negotiations for intellectual property rights, those are discussions we'll have through the negotiation process and come up with a mutually agreed upon set of terms and conditions. In the questions, I did see a lot in there about the sort of business relationships. This allows entities to structure those business relationships, the offers, in a manner that's most responsive to the solicitation and would put them in the best position to submit a high quality proposal. This could take the form of a consortium, could take the form as a traditional prime sub relationship. It could take it could take the form of any other business relationship you'd like to structure in order to best respond to an ultimate solicitation document. It also allows us to broaden that base of potential recipients. As we look at our traditional obligation structures, they do have burdens to entry. We can reduce many of those through the use of an other transactions mechanism. And the highlight and what I find best about this is that it does reduce lead time. If you look at our traditional award mechanisms, they can take quite some time for us to go from designing a solicitation through the evaluation process to an award. We can greatly reduce that lead time here. That provides a lot of savings in time and effort, both on the foundation, but also for anyone interested in responding to those proposals. We do have an other arrangements and other transactions guide. That guide is posted publicly on nsf.gov. If we have not released that link previously, we can definitely provide you a link to that document. It provides, in general, information around how we use the authorities, what we consider when we make the decision to use an other transaction. It also provides templates and samples for what terms and conditions would look like in a resulting contractual arrangement. So we can provide that information to everyone. That should answer a number of the questions folks have around the use of the authority.
We've had one more question come in this section, which I'd like to see if maybe Becca would like to address. It's what kind of resources, including funding, might be awarded in phase 0?
Yeah, I think we're looking into types of non-monetary resources for teams. You can imagine help drafting a research security plan, or help drafting other types of IP plans would be things that we would provide as different types of resources. A key one is going to be space and location. So is there going to be some kind of aid for teams to have a location or a kind of workspace present? That might be something that teams will have to coordinate themselves if they're outside of an institution already. And then finally, a really key one that we're still kind of working on, and we hope to have more details for you in the future, is kind of organizational resources, how to set up HR, how to set up employee benefits, things of that nature. The purpose of Tech Labs is really to decrease the bureaucratic non-research efforts to our team members. And we don't want you to then get caught up in establishing a new institution in ways that are like dealing with HR or dealing with that sort of bureaucracy and just trading one for another. So we are thinking quite deeply on how to provide those types of resources to you. And we hope to announce more about that later.
So if there aren't any other transaction comments from Patrick, we'll move on to the next section.
One, I did
Excellent.
just really
No,
quickly, I
Jacob,
did,
please.
no, I saw an interesting question, and I think Patrick may have some thoughts on this, but what kinds of expertise do you expect on the proposer side of the other transaction table, whether various kinds of lawyers or procurement folks? I think that you might have some thoughts on that. We've negotiated OTs with lots of different parties, but Patrick, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I think in general, we're actually looking for someone who's willing to partner with us to get to the right contractual arrangement. Now, on our side, just like on your side, that will involve contracting folks. So someone who understands and has the authority to enter into a contractual arrangement. I strongly suggest that if you don't have a lot of experience negotiating contracts with government, lawyers are helpful. Most of the teams we negotiate with, it is generally their senior program manager or their PI. It's some sort of attorney, and then someone who is familiar with how to structure the financial portion of a contract, right? So we have mentioned a couple of times milestone-based contracts. Those generally require some cost and price negotiation. So someone that understands how to do those cost buildups, someone that can help us walk through why those are the right dollar values we should be seeing, someone who understands how to structure like a monthly fee to continue operations of an entity well, completing the specific milestone-based tasks where there are also payments tied to them. So a lot of financial understanding, but it really is a fairly flexible process. We don't expect you to be an expert upfront. Other transactions are all over the government. You're seeing them more and more. But they are still relatively new to everyone. So unless you've done it before, there will be a lot of questions. And a big part of where we work with a potential awardee on the back end of that is to make sure that we can come to a meeting of the minds and have the same understanding of the resulting contractual arrangement. And if that requires us to have numerous meetings, if you have to start bringing in some other people, if we do, that's all just part of the basic negotiation process so that we can get to ultimately a place where we will all be successful.
So we're going to move on to section 5 of the questions. We've had a number of questions about timeline. Will the RFI submissions be published for the public to read? If so, when? If not, why? And so the answer to that, which is also the same question, when will the other transaction solutions offering, aka solicitation, be released? So we are in the program design phase. So the next step for us at NSF is reading through all of your hopefully very constructive criticism and great creative ideas on Tech Labs. And that's going to help us design and other transaction solutions offering, which will be published. So it will be available to the public. Everyone will be able to read it because, again, the RFI process is not a down select process. That will be coming later. We are hoping to have that out in the spring, but we don't have a more detailed timeline now because it really will depend on the responses that we get. We'll see if there are folks who come in and offer to partner with us directly with NSF to host Tech Labs, if there are other federal agencies who are interested as well, and how that will impact our timeline. But this is a priority for us, and we want to be able to move it forward as quickly as possible. So stay tuned in that way. And then when will the start date for Tech Labs be? So again, it will take time then for us after we put the solutions offering out to be able to get in responses and to be able to work with Patrick's team to be able to negotiate OT contracts. But it is our hope to get this program, off the ground as soon as possible. So then the start date for Tech Labs could be just a month or two after the OT contract is negotiated. Patrick, any more comments there on that part of the timeline?
No, I think that's correct. We typically have solicitation on the street for about 30 days, sometimes more, sometimes less, depending on feedback we get. We try to simplify the proposal process so the evaluations are fairly easy and don't take up a lot of unnecessary time. And then it does take us about 30 days to negotiate the final award once we select the awardee. And a big part of that is, again, just making sure that we're all on the same page with terms and conditions. But that's generally 30 to 60 days after we make an award determination, we could have someone up and running.
And so we have a variety of questions on the evaluation process and criteria. Becca, can I turn to you to talk us through some of that?
Sure. And this is something that we're still actively developing for the solicitation. And I think we really would benefit from your insight as in an RFI response for the evaluation itself. There will be either an internal evaluation by subject matter experts at NSF or an evaluation with external people, be they federal employees or external reviewers outside of the federal government. This is something that we're still kind of working out how to do. I will say whoever the reviewers are, internal or external, they would be present both reading the written proposals, and present at the oral presentations. There's another question about the page limit. There is 5 page limit for the RFI. What structure should the RFI response follow? That is somewhat up to the RFI, as long as it's within the guidelines present on sam.gov and 5 pages. You can structure the RFI response as you please. You do not have to answer all of the questions. You can tailor your questions or your answers to only the questions that you choose to answer. And PDF versus Word doc, either would really work. Either is preferable to kind of written in the email, but we'll still read it if it's written in the text of the email as well.
The RFI responses will not be made public. That's another question. They will be used internally in government to help us design this program. So if NSF ends up partnering with another U.S. government federal agency, we could be sharing relevant portions of what we've learned from the RFI responses with those other government agencies. And maybe you'll see some of your ideas reflected in the final solutions offering. But no, the RFI responses will not be published. We've got another question. Does Tech Labs replace the SBIR STTR program? And the answer is no. Tech Labs does not replace that or any of our existing programs. This is a new tool, a complement to other NSF programs, but not replacing any of them. I invite Joda, Becca, and Patrick to answer maybe 1 or 2 questions each that they see in the Q&A as we wrap up.
Sure. How many RFI responses can be submitted by one entity? We do not limit your RFI responses by multiple entities, so you may submit multiple. I will say that we do anticipate that the best and strongest RFI responses are going to be really concise in their feedback for us.
Yeah, I think an interesting question is like, what's the incentive for universities to allow full faculty to take full-time sabbatical? I've saw also like a question about like some of my researchers are interested, but they may not want to give up their positions. I think these are interesting questions, and I think ultimately this is why we're coming out to the community about what is the level of independence that allows us to get the top talent and also really emphasize and a level of operational autonomy in order to really rapidly drive towards progress, while also being attractive to the folks who are going to do the work. Recognizing the large scale funding that might be available to Runway to actually build something really ambitious here. We anticipate that might be a draw, but then we also are aware of tech, at least in independent research organizations, focused research organizations that have some associations with universities, like the Arts Institute does have a relationship with Stanford. There are others, and I think that again, we are open-minded about what the right relationship with parent institutions might be, if that is an appropriate relationship for a tech lab. But for us to be open-minded, I think we need to see a diversity of responses that allow us to sort of explore those ideas. And certainly we recognize there are a lot of opinionated folks that have a lot of experience that are listening to these webinars, and we want you to chime in. So yeah, I think that those are things that we would like to hear from you all.
Joda, can I also invite you to answer the question, how could an external investor work with Tech Lab teams that successfully complete the program?
A great question. So I think on a sort of theoretical basis, you could imagine, we've seen nonprofits that have spun out for-profit entities. It's a complex task to do, but I think that that's something that would be possible. You could also imagine some form of the platform technology being a feeder into a spin-out. You could also imagine leveraging other programs at NSF that are focused specifically on commercial pathways. If you're an investor, you could also really make a point of really investing in deep tech that's coming out of these kinds of tech labs. We would love to brainstorm with you on that. So please reach out to us at techlabs@nsf.gov. We've been talking to VC and investors about like where they fit in this, and would love to learn more, but also invite an RFI response to that particular point as well.
And Becca or Patrick, is there one last question that you have been dying to discuss?
Just one, because I saw it randomly. There was one asking about mentions of a future RFP. I think, for folks not familiar with requests for information or market intelligence like this, we are seeking to figure out how best to design a requirement. It is written, meaning future RFP. We intend to probably issue an RFP. We just want to make sure folks have an understanding that what you see here may not be what you see in a final RFP, right? It's both informed by what you provide to us. It's informed by other stakeholders that provide us feedback and input. And ultimately, what comes out may look slightly different, or it may not. So that's not intending to message that we're not intending to do something or we're going to do something different. It's just intending to make sure that folks understand that there may be a difference between now and 3 months from now. That's a random time frame. That's not an actual time frame, by the way.
Just real quick, we will post a recording to this this webinar on our website where we posted the December webinar, and within the next 48 hours or so.
So thanks so much for joining us today. You've asked us a lot of questions, but remember the RFI contains all of the questions that we have for you. And so please put some thought into that. We've really appreciated the responses that have come in so far, and we look forward to seeing what comes in before the January 20th deadline. So thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you all.